Some prisons are built to punish, others are built to correct mistakes, but a few are built with one purpose only: to crush hope. This prison belonged to the last category. Its official name was Western Penitentiary, but nobody inside called it that. Guards, inmates, and even people living nearby knew it by a different name, one that carried fear and finality. They called it the Wall. The nickname was not poetic. It was literal. I'm Joker. And tonight, we're going behind the mask.
The prison was surrounded by massive walls of limestone and concrete, reinforced with steel rods as thick as a man's forearm.
Those walls were not just high. They went deep underground, stretching nearly 3 meters below the surface. Watchtowers stood at every corner, armed guards scanning day and night. Inside, iron gates divided prisoners like layers of a fortress. Once you were inside the wall, you were meant to stay there forever, if necessary. By the mid-1990s, the prison was overcrowded far beyond its design. Cells built for one man often held 2 or 3. Tempers were short.
Knives were fashioned from bed frames, toothbrushes, scrap metal. Fights broke out over food, over glances.
Violence was normal. Fear was constant. Knives were handmade from scrap metal. Fights broke out over food, insults, or nothing at all. Some men never saw another sunrise. No one talked about the future, because the future did not exist here. Among the thousands of inmates was a man named Nuno Pontes. At first glance, Nuno did not look dangerous. He was calm, observant, and rarely raised his voice. But his mind worked constantly, always measuring, calculating, remembering. Before prison, Nuno had been a professional safecracker. He was not a street criminal or a reckless thief. He specialized in safes, complex locks, vault mechanisms, security systems. Where others saw metal and numbers, Nuno saw patterns. He broke into businesses, offices, and occasionally wealthy homes. He took cash, jewelry, documents, whatever was locked away and believed to be unreachable. Some of the money went to his family, some to friends who were struggling, but most of it funded a fast, luxurious life. That freedom ended in 1992. A late-night job went wrong, a silent alarm he hadn't accounted for. He was caught, tried, and sentenced to 15 years inside Western Penitentiary. At first, Nuno believed he could endure it. He was intelligent, adaptable. He could keep his head down. He was wrong. Prison life was a slow stripping away of illusions. The first year was shock. The second was hardening. By the third, Nuno understood the ecosystem of the wall in his bones. He saw men stabbed in the yard over debts as small as a pack of cigarettes. He saw guards beaten with pipes during a riot in Block C. He saw bodies carried out on stretchers, zipped into black bags. He learned the unspoken rules. Trust no one completely. Weakness is fatal. Eyes open, mouth shut. But by 1996, something in the air had changed. Overcrowding had reached a breaking point. Tension hummed like live wire. Violence was no longer sporadic. It was ambient, a background noise to every day. One evening, after witnessing a killing in a corridor, a swift, silent shanking over a disputed radio channel, Nuno stood in his cell and felt a cold clarity settle over him. He would not die here. He would not wait for the violence to find him. He would not let the wall have the last word. That night, a decision crystallized in the dark. He would escape. Escaping from the wall was more than difficult. It was considered impossible. For over a century, not a single inmate had successfully escaped. There had been attempts, desperate, foolish, tragic. Men had tried to break through walls, hide in laundry trucks, scale fences in the rain, all had failed. Most were caught within hours, some were shot. Nuno knew that any attempt could not be born of impulse. It would require time, months, perhaps years. Precision, every step measured, every variable controlled, secrecy, absolute, unwavering silence. The right people, not just allies, but specialists. And above all, it required a plan that lived only in fragments, in whispers, in the space between words. If even one wrong person learned of it, everything would end in solitary confinement or a coffin. Fate, or perhaps the indifferent machinery of prison transfers, intervened when a new inmate was placed in Nuno's cell. His name was Greg Kurian. Greg was quiet, but his silence was attentive. He watched guard rotations, memorized schedule changes, noted which officers were lazy and which were sharp. He was cautious but not fearful. A man who understood the value of patience over weeks through hushed nighttime conversations. The two men built a fragile trust. They shared stories of the outside, frustrations with the system, observations about the prison's rhythms. One night, with rain tapping against the barred window, Nuno took the risk. He did not lay out a plan. He did not mention tunnels or keys. He simply told the truth.
I'm not staying here, Greg. I'm getting out. I'm telling you because I trust you.
If you're serious, then I'm in.
I'm not staying here, Greg, he said. I'm getting out, and I'm not asking you to come. I'm telling you because I trust you not to say a word. Greg did not laugh. He did not look away. He sat on his bunk, silent for a full minute, the weight of the words hanging between them. Then he nodded, once. If you're serious, he said, then I'm in. That was the moment the idea became a pact. The escape was no longer a fantasy. It was a project. Together they began to analyze every conceivable escape route, playing a silent chess game against the prison's design. Breaking through the outer wall, impossible. The stone was 3 feet thick, laced with sensors, lit by floodlights, and patrolled by guards with rifles. Hiding in a vehicle, suicide. Every truck entering or leaving was searched. Inmate counts were religious. Before and after any movement, missing men were noticed within minutes. Bravery, too unstable. Guards talked. Deals fell through. Money was confiscated. Over the fence, a quick way to get shot. Only one option remained, looming like a dark possibility. A tunnel. It was the oldest method in the book, and the most dangerous. The water table was high. The soil was dense clay. Collapse was a constant threat. Worse, many had tried before. Every attempt had been discovered, which meant one thing: they would have to dig a tunnel better than anyone who had come before them. They would have to be smarter, quieter, and utterly relentless. They needed a third man, someone who understood the earth, who knew how to make it obey. They found him in Kevin Blinsley. Kevin was serving 40 years for armed robbery and assault. A rough, quiet man with thick hands scarred from a life of hard labor. Before prison, he had worked in coal mines, digging narrow shafts through unstable rock, shoring up tunnels, breathing dust and darkness. He knew how earth moved, how it settled, how it could kill you without warning. Nuno approached him carefully. In the yard, speaking in coded terms about digging a way out. Kevin listened, his expression unreadable. Then he said something that surprised them both.
I've thought about it every day since they brought me here. I just never believed it was possible. If you have a plan, I'll dig until my hands bleed.
I've thought about it every day since they brought me here, Kevin admitted. I just never believed it was possible. He looked at Nuno, then at Greg. If you have a plan, he said, I'll dig until my hands bleed. Now they had a miner. Now the tunnel had a foreman. Nuno's next move was a masterpiece of patience. He secured a job in the prison's maintenance department. On the surface, it was tedious work, fixing leaky pipes, replacing light fixtures, unclogging drains. But the job gave him two priceless advantages. One, he could move through areas most inmates never saw: utility corridors, boiler rooms, storage basements. He learned the prison's anatomy from the inside out. Two, information. The maintenance office contained filing cabinets stuffed with architectural blueprints, plumbing diagrams, and structural surveys. Maps of the wall, laid bare on paper. Night after night, Nuno studied them. He memorized the thickness of walls, the depth of foundations, the paths of sewer lines. He was looking for a weakness, a seam in the stone, a blind spot in the design. Then, one ordinary Tuesday, he found it. Assigned to fix a broken pipe in an external warehouse, he stepped into a building that stood outside the prison's main walls. It was used for storing construction materials and supplies, and its large rolling door opened directly onto a quiet side street. Freedom was no longer an abstract idea. It had an address. Knowing where to dig was only the beginning. They needed a place to start. Inside the maintenance building was a small, forgotten storage room. Below its floor was a narrow crawl space, a dark, dusty void between the foundation and the ground. It was the perfect launch point for a tunnel. There was one problem. The room was locked. Only guards had the key. Breaking the door was too loud. Picking the lock required tools and time they didn't have. Nuno realized they needed the key itself, or a perfect copy. What followed was an operation of audacious subtlety. They staged a fight in the yard, two inmates shoving and shouting, drawing guards into the fray. In the confusion, Nuno slipped close to a distracted guard's belt. With a piece of soft styrofoam smuggled from the workshop, he pressed the head of the storage room key into it, capturing its precise shape. The impression was fragile, a ghost in foam, but it was enough. Using stolen metal files and a small torch in the maintenance workshop, they forged a copy. The first key was too weak. It snapped in the lock, leaving a piece of metal lodged inside. A death sentence if discovered. For 10 agonizing minutes, working with a bent wire in near total darkness, Nuno fished out the broken shard, his heart hammering against his ribs. The second key, made thicker, stronger, turned smoothly. The lock clicked. The door opened. They were in. The digging began in total silence. They worked in shifts. One man in the hole, another keeping watch, a third disposing of dirt. Kevin was the architect of the deep. He taught them to dig at an angle, to shore up the ceiling with stolen wood scraps, to listen for the telltale creak of impending collapse. The soil was heavy clay, cold, wet, and back-breaking to move. It clung to their tools, their clothes, their skin. Their equipment was pitiful. A homemade shovel fashioned from a bunk leg, buckets stolen from the laundry, mining helmets with small lights, pilfered from a storage closet. There was no ventilation. As the tunnel deepened, the air grew thin and stale. Each breath felt like sucking soup through a straw. They could only work in short bursts before clambering out, dizzy and gasping. The tunnel had to descend 4 meters to pass safely beneath the prison's subterranean wall. Then it had to stretch 12 meters horizontally to reach the warehouse. They moved the earth in pillowcases, in trash bags, in their pockets. They spread it in the garden, flushed it down toilets, scattered it in forgotten corners. By the end, they had removed 15 tons of dirt, handful by handful, bucket by bucket. Every scoop carried the risk of burial. Every sound might be the one that gave them away. Secrets are currency in prison, and soon others began to notice the transactions. Carmen Keller was the first to confront them. A lifer convicted of second-degree murder, he was volatile, sharp-eyed, and desperate. He had seen them entering the maintenance room too often, emerging too dirty. He cornered Nuno in the showers.
I know you're digging ahead. You either include me or I go to the guards.
I know you're digging. You either include me or I go to the guards. It was not an offer. It was an ultimatum. They had no choice. Carmen was in. Next came George Connor, an older inmate with ties to the outside world. He wouldn't dig, but he could arrange for a getaway car once they were out. He was added for utility. Then Andrew Heim, a car thief with quick hands and knowledge of hot wiring. He would be their driver. Finally, almost as an afterthought, they included Thomas Burke, a sickly, nearly blind old man. Leaving him behind risked suspicion, and Nuno felt a pang of pity. But Thomas would be a burden, but he was also a shield. No one would suspect the frail old man of being part of an escape. 6 men now shared the secret. 6 destinies tied to a hole in the ground. The team was complete, and it was fragile. Disaster struck in December 1996. Kevin and Carmen were deep in the tunnel, widening the passage, when a sudden wall of sound erupted through the prison. Sirens. A guard had been stabbed in another wing. The prison went into total lockdown. Red lights flashed. Voices shouted through megaphones. Guards stormed the halls, dragging inmates back to cells, counting heads with frantic urgency. Kevin and Carmen were trapped underground. If they were missed during the count, the guards would tear the prison apart until they were found. The tunnel would be discovered. Everything would be over. Nuno acted on pure instinct. He sparked a violent shouting fight between 2 nearby inmates, creating a chaos of swinging arms and yelling guards. In the confusion, he broke away and sprinted to the maintenance building. He fumbled with the key, threw open the door, and crawled to the tunnel entrance. Now, he hissed into the darkness. Seconds later, 2 mud-caked figures emerged, eyes wide with panic. They had just scrambled out and hidden the entrance when boots echoed in the corridor outside. They had survived by a heartbeat. Weeks later, the tunnel's end finally touched the underside of the warehouse floor. The last barrier was 6 inches of reinforced concrete, laced with steel rebar, impossible to break through quietly, impossible to leave unbroken. Using a hydraulic jack stolen from the maintenance shop, they placed it against the concrete and began to pump. The metal groaned. The concrete cracked, a spiderweb of fractures spreading outward. Then, with a sound like a gunshot, a section gave way. Dust flooded the tunnel, and through the whole fresh, cold, free air, they could hear the distant hum of traffic. They could see the faint glow of streetlights through the gap. They had reached the other side. Carefully, they covered the hole with a piece of plywood and scattered debris over it. They would wait one more day. Escape was now a matter of timing. Escape day began in the dark. Using forged work passes provided by Carmen, who had access to the education office, they left their cells before the morning count. One by one, they slipped into the maintenance room and vanished into the earth. The tunnel was claustrophobic, damp, and terrifying. Thomas, the old man, struggled to breathe and had to be pulled through. But one by one, they emerged inside the warehouse storage room, a space filled with machinery and shadows. They changed quickly into civilian clothes they had hoarded for months. They pulled on construction helmets, a simple disguise. At 6:45 a.m., as shift changes blurred the guards' routines, they walked out of the warehouse's side door. A guard in a distant watchtower glanced down. Nuno raised a hand in casual greeting. The guard waved back, then turned away. They kept walking, step by step, across the street, around a corner, out of sight. They were outside. They were free. Andrew hot-wired, A sedan parked 2 blocks away. They piled in and drove west, putting miles between themselves and the wall. By the time the escape was discovered at the 10 a.m. head count, they were already 200 kilometers away, crossing state lines. Their plan was precise. Drive to Texas. Meet a contact who would provide fake passports. Cross into Mexico. Disappear. But freedom, they soon learned, was louder and more fragile than they had imagined. Thomas, weak and ill, began to falter. His withdrawal from medications left him trembling. Carmen's nerves, steady inside the prison, began to fray outside. He jumped at sirens, argued over routes, doubted every decision. The outside world was no longer a dream. It was real, unpredictable, and full of eyes. Their first safe house was a cheap motel on the outskirts of a Texas town. They waited for their contact with the fake IDs, but Thomas could not last. In a moment of pain and confusion, he left the room and collapsed on the sidewalk. An ambulance was called. He gave a fake name, but his description was circulated. An old, sick man matching an escaped inmate. Police attention tightened. Then, on January 14th, Carmen and Nuno were spotted during a supply run. A patrol car tried to pull them over. Carmen panicked and led them on a high-speed chase through back roads before ditching the car and fleeing into woods. Carmen was caught. Nuno escaped, but the net was closing. Under interrogation, Carmen broke. He gave up the contact. The man making their fake IDs. The police tracked the forger. They watched him, waited. On January 20th, 1997, when the man delivered the finished passports to a new motel where the group was hiding, police and SWAT teams moved in. There was no dramatic standoff, no final run, just the brutal efficiency of doors kicked in, shouts of down on the ground, and the cold click of handcuffs. 12 days of freedom, then the end. The punishment was not just a return to prison. It was a message. Nuno Pontes was sentenced to 14 years in solitary confinement, 23 hours a day in a concrete box, 1 hour in a cage alone. The others received decades added to their sentences, transferred to supermax facilities. Their reward for one of the most ingenious, determined prison escapes in American history was 12 days of liberty. The tunnel was filled with concrete. The storage room was sealed. Security was double. The legend of the wall was repaired, but forever altered. Epilogue: the weakness in the stone. For over a century, no one escaped the wall, until 6 men, armed with nothing but patience, intelligence, and sheer will, proved that even the strongest prison has a weakness. It is not in the stone or the steel or the guards. It is in the belief that men buried alive will stop dreaming of the sky. They dug not just through earth, but through despair, and for 12 days they breathed free air. The wall still stands, but so does the story. It just takes everything to break through.